So I just go off percentages of sugar from the fruit.
Yeah, so I was reading one of the books, things, I don't know, it was Ken Stram or the other one.
Yeah.
That has the
Yeah,
formula, has the
Yeah.
formula for that. The other question, the last question was, after you ferment, let's say ferment at 60 degrees, fermentation is done, you start racking to secondary, tertiary. Does the temperature affect after that? Let's say my room goes like to 70 degrees, it will not affect?
Not as much. It's not, temperature after fermentation is done is not as important. However, you still want to kind of just keep it cool. But it doesn't necessarily need to be in your low 60s or so. I think as long as you're below 78, I think you're fine. But you don't want to necessarily get to 78 either. I would just keep it as cool as possible, but not as important essentially than during fermentation. So that temperature is going to make a big difference during fermentation because that's when the yeast is doing all that work. Yeah.
I started brewing mead earlier this year, and you know, of the different styles out there, for me, like, what would you recommend for someone who wants to add spices to their mead? Because I tried earlier in the year a batch where I added cinnamon and thought I added just enough, and then when I tasted the final product, I'm like, it's way too much cinnamon that I added. It just seems like
fireball.
Yeah, it just seemed like it just seems like such a fine dance to be walking when you're adding spices to mead.
Best advice for adding spices to a mead is add it in secondary for sure, and add it in any kind of like a hop bag, or muslin bag, whatever have you, pantyhose, and just add it in and basically just steep it, and just taste for really strong spices. Taste it every hour or so, and kind of make sure that it's not going to really just get out of hand, depending on how much spices you're adding. So I mean, if you're adding 2 teaspoons of cinnamon and a vanilla bean, you might be fine tasting it every day. But if you're going to add like half a pound of cinnamon and a pound of vanilla beans, then you might want to taste that every 15 minutes. So it's also kind of dependent on how much of the spices you're actually adding. But yeah, I would just say do that. And I've on the homebrew side of things, I've actually tied some fishing line onto the actual bags that I would add the spices into. That way I can just fish it out with the line and just pull it right out. It's normally primary on the homebrew scale, or even in our small batch experimental scale at the meaderies. Primary, I prefer fermenting in buckets. Like an 8-gallon bucket is perfect for a 5-gallon batch, because during the fermentation process, we're also degassing that mead, releasing up all that CO2 that the yeast is producing during the fermentation process. So having a 5-gallon batch and an 8-gallon bucket, it's a lot easier to whip up that mead and get all that CO2 released without it foaming over the top of the bucket. Don't try to degas in a carboy of any size. Just mainly also because of that concave neck. All that pressure is going to be centralized, and you're just going to have a huge volcano coming out of the top. And I will tell you, the ceiling of my basement is multicolored because of that. And once it happens, there is nothing that you can do to stop it from happening. I mean, you think I'm just going to put my hand over it and wait for it to... No. You're just delaying the inevitable. And when you think, I'm just going to raise my hand a little bit to contain it, then you just start broadcasting it sideways. Once it happens, just let it go. There's nothing that you're going to do to make it any better. The spices, add to secondary, and normally secondary I would do in a carboy. That way it's a little easier to kind of maintain the integrity, the quality of the mead in a carboy rather than just having a big open bucket. So every time you open it, you're just really just letting everything out. You're going to introduce more oxygen at that point that you don't want to introduce. So in a carboy, it's a lot easier for me to make. But yeah, a little hot bag, some fishing line so you can easily pull it out. That's it. The best things are plastic carboys with the valve on the bottom, the spigot on the bottom. That way you can literally just pull a sample. You don't even have to go into the actual carboy at all. I prefer those. We use like Better bottles and whatever other brands that they were called for different ones, but that's what we mainly use at the meadery.
So you're saying that you have your sample carboy sitting around that is kind of representative of your big tank, so you're just sampling that?
Yeah. Yeah, so if we're doing like a really small batch experimental, yeah, it's gonna be in usually a 5-gallon batch, you know. Sometimes even a 1-gallon batch, especially if it's an ingredient that I really have no idea how it's gonna interact in a mead. I'd rather not put more of a risk of wasting all that honey in even just a 5-gallon batch. I'd rather just do it in a 1-gallon. I mean, sometimes we actually just pull a gallon of a finished mead in a tank into a 1-gallon jug and just add it in. But yeah, at the same time, it's 5 gallons. If you have those, like, especially those plastic carboys with the spigot on the bottom, some of them you can even get, like the better bottles had. So you can have actually like a mini racking arm on the inside too. Those are awesome because you leave so little behind and you don't have to mess with racking canes and cleaning and sanitizing them and then cleaning them again afterwards and all the drippage that they create when you pull them out of the carboy. Have a little sample port at the bottom of that carboy is awesome. Yeah.
When doing a semi-sweet meats and sweet meats, do you write out to the yeast tolerance or do you back sweet?
Neither. So we just stop it where we want it.
You just stop where you want it, you just metabisulfite?
Basically, yeah, we do. So most of our mead recipes are 14%.
Okay.
Usually the ones that are lower than 14 are your drier or meads that we kind of know that are going to end where around your 12% mark anyway. So essentially, most of your yeast strains are going to have like your 14% alcohol tolerance. So we use that to our advantage. And we kind of try to formulate the recipe based upon that and having it basically just peter out towards the very end of fermentation. I mean, we could have gotten to, let's say we have a 14-day fermentation time on a particular recipe. We'll formulate that recipe with the starting gravity and the nutrients to basically get as close to 14 as possible and just completely end on its own. With some batches though, especially when we're fermenting with fruit as well, you got so many more simple sugars in with the honey as well. That is also a bunch of simple sugars. But with fruit batches, you're going to have a way faster fermentation rate regardless. So basically, we actually make sure that we stop fermentation at the final gravity that we want. So that's the most important number for us commercially is our final gravity. That ensures every time we make this recipe, it's exactly the same sweetness level. We try to hit our starting gravity on as closely as possible, but our final gravity is the most important to us. So once we hit that final gravity, we cold crash everything so it's 62, we cold crash it down to 32, and it stops fermentation almost instantly. From there, we filter all the yeast out, and then we stabilize it with potassium metabisulfate and potassium sorbate. Okay. So actually, we've gone away from using potassium sorbate because our filtration process kind of just it's unnecessary with the filtration process that we have now. There's no need for us to use sorbate anymore. But on a homebrew scale, that's really kind of the only way to really fully stabilize your mead. Yeah. But you can't add sulfite and sorbate during active fermentation. It's not going to do anything. A lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to add the sorbate and sulfites and done. No, it's just going to keep going. So you want to either cold crash it or do something to basically stall that fermentation, and then you're adding your sulfite and your sorbate.
Why is that?
It's just ineffective. If the yeast is active and going, they don't care what you added to them. But
See, I thought that the sorbate or the potassium metabisulfate, what I had thought about is I thought that they prevented them from reproducing.
the sorbate does, yeah.
Because the sorbate does
Yeah.
that.
The
So
sorbate is what-
everything's still going. It ain't reproducing.
Yeah, it's
still
kind of
going.
like trying
I got
to,
it.
yeah. It's
still
like,
going.
it's the difference between trying to like fight somebody off that's running at you versus just punch them in the face real nice and good while they're asleep. That's the difference. You're gonna have a much better chance of knocking them out in his sleep. Yeah. That's basically it. You're putting the yeast to sleep with cold crashing or whatever method have you, and then you're
Knocks them out.
just knocking them out. Yeah.
In making a boucher,
Yeah.
does it matter what the variety, is there a difference between the varieties of honey since you're cooking it? I asked this a couple years back at the Homebrew conference, and they really couldn't answer
Yeah, it's tough. I never really met anybody that makes a lot of bouchets, right? I've only made 2 myself. We haven't even made one commercially yet. But I would say it doesn't, depending on how far you're taking it. So it does and it does not. If you're only looking for a slight caramelization of the honey, then it does matter what kind of honey varietal you're using, I think. If you're going to take it as close as you can get before it actually starts burning, then it really doesn't matter what kind of honey varietal you're using. So we actually did an experimental where we took buckwheat honey and boiled the living crap out of it. And coincidentally, it actually burned off all of the offensive nuances of that buckwheat honey. And so that was actually pretty interesting. I'm like, oh wow, what if we just take buckwheat honey and caramelize it and use it for a bouquet? And that final product actually ended up tasting a little bit closer to soy sauce than anything else. So we never repeated that. But if depending on how far you're taking the caramelization of the honey, I think depends on whether or not the varietal of the honey is going to really affect the flavor at all. Yeah, if you're caramelizing on light clover honey just a little bit, it's going to be different than an orange blossom honey, just caramelized a little bit, but all the way down to almost black or really dark brown, I really don't see much of a difference. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, about the aging. So, how old is it when you filter it and do the sterile filtration?
Depends on our production. If we need it right away, it could be in as little as 3 to 4 weeks.
So the yeast is done with secondary and all that.
Yeah, yeah. We actually filter it before what you would call essentially secondary for us. So we ferment it in a tank, and then when it's done fermenting, we cold crash for a few days. We transfer it off of the yeast into our mixing tank. We clean out the yeast. We clean, rinse, sanitize the tank, and then we actually filter it off of the yeast halfway, and then we filter it the second half back into a clean tank where it started. So our secondary is essentially already filtered.
Is that rough filtration, or is that?
We do everything down to sterile on like a plate and frame filter method, which is as good as 70% effective. Even at sterile filtration at 0.45 micron, you're only talking, and depending on the filtration method, plate and frame is only at best 70% effective. So even like those, the home wine filters and everything, when they say sterile, a lot of the home winemaking filters are actually 0.5, they're not even 0.45 micron. But even those, they're only going to be up to 70% effective. Then you get into other filtration methods, which we use. Basically, they're called membrane cartridge filtration, and one of which is actually considered absolute filtration. So we use those in line with our bottling line. So as we're bottling, we have sterile filtered product, 70% effective. And then it goes through a membrane filter that's rated at over 95% effective, which immediately comes out of that filter and goes into a 99.999% effective absolute filtration. So nothing can pass through that filter unless it was smaller than 0.45 micron. So if any yeast cell makes it into our bottles, they damn well deserve to be in there, basically.
No wonder your meads are so clear.
Yeah, we thought we had clear meads when we first started off before filtration, and then we were like, wow, no, this is clear. Then we started filtering. But we only really started filtration more for just ensuring the quality. It's not really for appearance for us. So we were producing clear mead before we filtered. It was just a matter of stabilization and making sure, just quality assurance really.
Hose didn't explode.
Yeah, and we've had some of those. Yeah, and anytime that's ever happened, that was like in our first year basically. It sucked because whenever something like that happens, it would only always happen like 3 to 5 months down the line after we bottled it. It's all fine and dandy right now, and it's good for a few months, and then all of a sudden we get a call about a bottle that we bottled up, 4 or 5 months ago. And we're like, no way. And it's not even every bottle. We'll go through our cases in-house whenever that happened, and we're like, this bottle's fine, that bottle's fine. Poof, that one wasn't. So, and anytime that ever happened, we either gave a full refund or we exchanged that bottle for any other bottle on our shelves, just to make up for it as we basically figured out what we were going to do moving forward. And we took a lot of steps and spent a lot of money at experimenting with different filtration steps and methods, and basically finally got to a point where we do all that filtration before, do the filtration in line with our bottling line. Our bottling line has actually been cleaned, rinsed, sanitized, and then steam sterilized. And the bottles that are coming to the filler were just rinsed seconds before with sulfite citric acid solution. So it's like, we've had people call us paranoid, I call it necessary. In the commercial scene, I call it necessary. We cannot do anything else other than pasteurize our meat. We cannot do anything else to ensure the quality of our product.
Do you pasteurize it?
No.
And what would happen to the taste if you pasteurized?
Not sure. Never tried pasteurization with meat. There is a meadery that I make good friends with. They're down in Georgia, and he told me how they bottle. It was pretty interesting. They run their mead through a tankless hot water heater, and they plumb it and they run it through, and it goes through at like 140 degrees, and in line with their bottler. And then they actually bottle hot, which they use T-top corks, which is fine for bottling hot, because if you use a regular cork, when that bottle comes up to room temperature, it's going to create a suction. It's going to pull.
Cork is going to be inside.
Yeah, the cork will pull right in.
Would it lose some of the, would it boil off some of the alcohol?
No, not at 140. The alcohol boiling is 170.
173.6.
Yeah, there you go.
If you're wondering.
Not anybody would know. So now you've got a starter state, how many samples?
Yes, I got plenty of samples.
Have you got new closures that your old closure company's got?
Yeah, that's been our biggest hurdle. We've been using these plastic closures from day one that are awesome. You don't need a corkscrew to remove it.
We've only opened a few of
Oh,
them.
the Sorks?
Okay, yeah, the Sorks, yeah.
Sorks. I was reading a post that you put that you were selling Sorks, they stopped making them?
Yeah, so the manufacturer of those Zorks went out of business. The last day that they actually manufactured any was May 31st. So luckily, we found out 2 to 3 months earlier that that was going to happen from our supplier. And even though they weren't supposed to tell anybody, but they told us because we were the #1 purchaser of Zorks from them. So we had to make a switch and make it fast. So we decided, we were considering going with screw caps, which are awesome and just as convenient. However, this seems to be the only country in the world that considers a screw cap and a cheap wine. And all of our bottles are, you're talking $18 to $25 a bottle. So we didn't really think going screw caps was the best route. So instead we chose corks. We figured, well, corks aren't going anywhere. So like the Zorks, we won't have a problem like that anymore. So we had to make a switch. Sounds easy enough. But when you consider that everything, we automated our bottling process with the bottling line, and that bottling line is specifically made with the closure section to apply Zorks and nothing else. So put us in a predicament. We could have actually gotten it modified, that Zork, we call it the Zorker, and we could have modified the Zorker into a corker, but it would have cost us $6,000 more than just buying a standalone automated corker that we could put at the end of the bottling line. So we went with that route instead, even though it extends our bottling line now, which sucks because the bottling line is literally as big as we could technically put in there. So we're gonna have to take it apart and move stuff around whenever we need a bottle. Yeah, and hopefully, I think our corker is finally gonna arrive in October. Hopefully by the time we have our current batches ready to bottle, because in between, we've actually already hand corked a little over 8,000 bottles. Yeah, between July and now, we've corked, manually corked over 8,000 bottles. I'll tell you, you get calluses and that was done in 4 days.
Wow.
4 days of time, over 8,000
You
bottles.
gotta set the cork and then pull it down?
Yeah,
Manual corkers?
yes, floor corker, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, lots of backache because you're constantly slightly bent over, not bent over all the way, just slightly, which is even worse, I think.
You gotta put on a table almost where you're doing it like this.
Nah, it gets even harder. Then trust me, we tried. It got to the point where we mounted it onto a pallet. We just bolted it down to a pallet so it also didn't keep moving around everywhere every time we were corking. And then we even got to into a good flow where one guy was just in charge of grabbing the bottle off the line and putting it on the corker and going down, because the other guy was putting the cork in the corker and taking the bottle off of it and putting it into the case. Because we went from bottling like 1,800 bottles an hour, or 1,700 bottles an hour rather, to bottling at like 400 bottles an hour. So we're like, we need to pick this shit up because this is moving way too slow. And we have like over 8,000 bottles to go through. It's like, it took us 4 days, like, I forgot how many hours it was altogether, but it took us 4 days to bottle that many bottles. Where we could have done that, honestly, like in an afternoon. But, yeah, so we became pretty efficient at doing it the sucky way, but we had to do it. We had no other choice.
Learn to appreciate the nice way of doing it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we definitely appreciate it a lot more. Yeah. We used to hand bottle everything for our first 2 years, and then we got spoiled for a year. You know, and it was like, ah, man, this sucks.
So is mead ever canned?
It is mainly you see some canned meads. There are, let's see, 3 or 4 meaderies that I know of that do some canning. It's usually the lower alcohol stuff, though. Not your 12-14% alcohol mead stuff. Yeah. We're going to be canning. I don't know exactly when our first canning run will be, but we're going to be canning in like the cool, like the 6-point 12-ounce slim cans. We're going to be canning our draft meads in those.
So what's the most popular Asian drinks?
Our most popular, we have a lot. And they all kind of sound like we have one that always kind of edges out over the others, but I brought a bottle of it today. It's called Midnight Jack. It's a sweet dark berry mead. So we ferment the honey with blackberry, black currant, black raspberry, and black cherry juices. So it's really nice. It's sweet. It's got a little bit of tannin, enough acidity. It's kind of like everything that's really good about a wine or a mead is all in that one recipe.
Can we try it?
Yes. I only brought one bottle of it. So I brought 7 bottles, but it was one bottle of 7 different meads. So it's a really good range. We have some drier stuff, we have some sweeter stuff, fruit stuff, traditional. But you guys, I guess, get to pick what you'd rather have. But other than that, our #1 bestseller, whenever it's available, which is only one time a year, we have to wait for cider season to come around, which it just did, is our apple pie mead. So we call it nicest pie. We ferment the honey with freshly pressed Jersey apple cider, and then we age it on cinnamon and vanilla beans. Any other questions?
No, they're just waiting to taste.
All right. All right, I'll pull all the bottles out. I'll start uncorking some. And, I just started getting used to having a corker on me. I actually did a talk to the Raritan Valley Beekeeper Association on Thursday. Took some bottles there. First time taking bottles to a presentation after we started corking, and I showed up with no corker. Like, luckily beekeepers carry around Swiss Army knives, which is pretty good.